Hello and welcome to Experience Points. I'm your host, Miles Goldsmith, and on today's episode, I'm interviewing the RPG writer Dominique Dickey. Dominique has worked on some really cool RPGs such as Plant Girl Game and the D&D campaign Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel. Without any further ado, let's meet our guest and get into the episode. Hello! Hi, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Awesome, I'm doing good. Thank you so much for coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Do you want to just start by introducing yourself?
Yeah, of course. I'm Dominique Dickey. I use they, them pronouns. I am a bunch of things. I wear a lot of hats. I am a writer, editor, cultural consultant, working in fiction, RPGs, LARPs, occasionally video games, really focused on telling stories and also avenues to give players the tools to tell stories.
That's awesome. So what sort of projects have you been working on recently?
What I'm currently working on, or like what's had a lot of my brain space lately, is Plant Girl Game, my RPG with my small business Sly Robot games that I run with CJ Linton. We crowdfunded on Game Found back in July and are gearing up to be able to get the game to our backers. It is a really rules light story game about a family of plant children working to prevent ecological disaster in their small town, and has a lot of themes about family and community building that I feel really passionate about, as well as taking care of the environment around you and getting in touch with like what you can do on a more local level as well. So we've been working on getting that to layout, getting all of the different pieces together to be able to get that to backers very soon. And then I also work for my day job at Monty Cook Games as a designer and editor there, and have been working on Old Gods of Appalachia, which crowdfunded last year and was a huge success on Kickstarter, as well as gearing up for our upcoming campaign, Adventures in the Cipher System, which, depending on when this goes up, will have already happened. I'm not sure.
So how did you first get interested in playing RPGs?
All through high school, I kind of knew RPGs existed, and I'd been writing fiction since I was like a little kid. And I was really interested in the kind of opportunity to tell stories collaboratively and in a social setting, because I felt like I wasn't really getting that aside from like my involvement in local theater. And I really wanted to play RPGs, but didn't have like the right kind of social group to make it happen, especially because I went to a pretty small high school and my friends were like busy with like other stuff. And it was the kind of like very limited social pool where you can't just like pick up and make new friends. Like your friends are your friends for 6 years. And I got to college, and my first weekend of living on campus, a bunch of guys on my floor in my dorm were starting a D&D campaign and asked me if I wanted to join. And we only played like a handful of sessions because we all got busy with midterms and we all had like other stuff going on once the academic year started. But just that first weekend of orientation, we played like a couple sessions of D&D, and I was hooked not only on RPGs as like a medium, but also just on the vibe of getting to sit around with your friends and tell a story, and having that kind of like prescribed way to relate. I feel like it especially with making new friends in a new city and in a new environment, it took a lot of the social pressure off because we could all just gather with like snacks and drinks or whatever and see what our characters would do. And I didn't have to worry about like being likable or being cool. Like, because I was just like, I'm playing a human wizard named Michelle Obama. Let's see what Michelle Obama is going to do today, And like, I didn't have to be my awkward self, and it was a lot easier to have like a lower barrier to interaction that way. And from there, it was a pretty short slide into writing my own content because I sort of became aware of what was going on in the indie scene, that there were so many games on itch, and you could find like a niche RPG to do almost anything that you wanted an RPG to do. But I also didn't really have the community that I have now or the information literacy that I have now. So I knew vaguely that I could find a game for any of my storytelling and social needs, but didn't quite know how to go about like locating what I actually wanted. And I had to like sift through the stuff that doesn't work to find the stuff that's like really, really good. And I was just coming from a place of being really frustrated and wanting to tell stories in certain genres or in certain like aesthetics with my friends and not having the tools to do so. And started like writing game content just to be able to facilitate like very specific storytelling with a very specific group of people. And then like realize people might be into this, you know? Like it might be worth seeing if anyone wants to get in on what I'm doing. And yeah, that's kind of how I got here now.
That's really cool. What was the first sort of professional thing you did with working on RPGs?
So I started as an intern at Monte Cook Games in my junior year of college. And that kind of helped me find my feet as a designer because I'd been designing like really small things to play with my friends and hadn't published anything at that point. And then as part of my internship, I approached Monty and asked like I would really love to write an adventure. Like, can I do that as a kind of case study and a capstone of my internship? Because I've been doing a lot of shadowing and a lot of small tasks and really getting a feel for how all of the different branches of the company worked from, like writing to editing to development to layout and design. And I thought that it would be just such good practice to get to take one product, even if it was a very small product, through all of those steps. And I wrote this adventure mostly for like the educational experience with no guarantee that it would be published or anything, mostly just trying to write it for the sake of writing it and see what I could learn by making it, especially because I had access to such wonderful people that were so willing to share knowledge with me that I wanted to make the most of it by learning more experientially. And I took that approach to kind of self-directing, writing this adventure during my internship, and ended up being published. And that was my first like professional writing credit in the RPG space. And it also gave me a lot of legitimacy kind of internally as a designer because my adventure that I wrote in my internship was called Heist on Miracle 4, and it was very tropey and campy and all the things that my play group at the time would have really vibed with. Like I wrote it as if I was writing for my friends. And that was when I first realized like I can write exactly the things that interest me and the people that I love the most. And people want to read it and play it and go there with me. And it helped me really find my confidence. And from there I began freelancing pretty quickly after my internship ended. And I also put out my first self-published RPG trial pretty quickly after that as well. And kind of went away from MCG and finished my degree and gathered up some writing credits and got more experience through freelancing. And then circled back and am now back at MCG full time now that I have a bit more experience.
That's really cool. So recently you worked on the D&D campaign Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel. What was it like working on that?
I think everyone working on the project was very aware that we were making something that had the potential to be groundbreaking. So there was a lot of pressure, but also a lot of playfulness of like, we are writing into the future. This is going to be the future of the art form and of this property. It's on us to determine what that looks like, which is terrifying, but also what do we want that to look like? Like, how do we want to collaborate and make that happen? And we had a lot of really open communication and collaboration within the writing team. We all would workshop ideas and would kind of help each other make our stuff better, partly because we all knew that we had a really high mark to hit, and there was almost no room for ego in that process, where I think it took a lot of humility and a lot of trust to just say like, hey, I'm trying to do this specific thing. I'm not quite hitting the mark, but I know like you're really good at NPC backstory, or you're really good at adventure hooks, or you're really good at like monster tables. Like, can we jam on this for a minute? And it led to some very strong working relationships and very strong friendships. And it was also a lot of fun and really exciting. And I also think that because those like big, more like traditional publishing projects have such long lead time, it feels the process of working on it feels so far away now that even though the book hasn't been out for very long and is still, finding new readers and new GMs and a new audience, it's almost weird to reflect back on it because it feels like it was so long ago at this point.
Is there a specific role-playing game that you really love to play? If so, what do you love about it?
Ooh. Hmm. As a GM, and I say this not just because I work there, this would be my answer regardless, but the Cypher system I with Monty Cook Games, it's very lightweight and very modular, which means that it's super easy to like binge genre and bring in characters from like other campaigns and have like those really fun callback moments at the table. The math is super easy, which like I'm awful at math and combat, whether I'm GMing or playing. And as a player, it's D20 based. And when I'm playing, I really like the swinginess of the D20. I don't love it as a designer, but when I'm playing, I'm really with it. But then as a GM, the GM never rolls. So it's one less thing for me to have to like mentally keep track of when I'm GMing. So I feel like whether I'm playing it or running it, it gives me the experience of like getting to roll this big swingy dice and not knowing what'll happen, but also kind of being like, oh, the dice are not my problem right now.
What do you like about using RPGs as a storytelling medium?
Ooh, okay. That is a really big question. I want to think about how to approach this one and be really intentional about it because I like that when you're role playing and you're kind of playing to find out what happens next, there's so much room for like true collaboration because you genuinely don't know what's going to happen in most cases. It's really up to the dice or any external numerical mechanics and also the individual, like the unique combination of people at the table. And it feels like you can make something that's really greater than the sum of its parts. And I also feel like when you really are dropped into that role play space, it's kind of impossible not to bring elements of yourself into your character. I've stopped trying not to, honestly. And that can be really satisfying to play a character who might have similar qualities to you, but still respond differently. It feels like getting to try on being a new self. I feel like it offers new ways to find clarity and perspective that apply to your real life. I've had a lot of moments where role play has allowed me to like become the person I want to be, both from the escapism standpoint of characters getting to have adventures that I wouldn't get to have because I live in this society and not like some other genre, but also the experience of like, let's say I'm playing a character that's like really witty and has a really sharp sense of humor, and I don't feel like I can role play that very well. So then in like session after session, I'm really pushing myself to kind of put that on and be in that character and be dropped into that role play. And maybe if you play that long enough, I've had this experience for sure myself, that you can kind of practice those traits and then start to take on those traits. So I've definitely used role play as a way to like come more into confidence in various areas of my life or to like find and embody qualities that I'm looking for in my actual life. And then the other thing that I think is really beneficial is, and this goes back to, playing D&D in my freshman dorm, is that for people that might have like social difficulties, it gives you a very prescribed way to socialize. And I found this really useful in situations where I'm making new friends, like at a con or when I just moved to college, but also early in the pandemic as well. I played a lot of RPGs on Zoom because it gave me a way to stay in touch with people that I wouldn't otherwise be able to like make deliberate time to see. But it also meant that we weren't just like sitting in our little screen boxes talking about current events. Like it gave us an excuse to be in community, but it also gave us something to do that wasn't just sitting and being miserable together. And I kind of still use RPGs that way, where it gives you an excuse to get a group of friends together and do an activity. And I think that that's kind of underrated because I think it's very easy to fall into a rut of just talking about the weather or why things suck or why the weather sucks. And sometimes it's nice to just get to sit in a circle and be someone else with different problems.
When sitting down to write either a story for an RPG professionally or just to play with your friends, where are some places where you look for inspiration for these campaigns?
I get a lot of ideas from dreams. I tend to have dreams that are very vivid and very narratively driven. And a lot of the time, I am not present in my own dreams. It's like I'm watching something play out to someone else. I used to do this thing, I do it less now because I have a better sleep schedule now that I'm an actual adult. But when I was in college, if I was just really stuck on something, I would just go lay down for like 30 minutes and kind of doze and see if it helped me come up with anything. And I called it just seeing what was playing on the Dream Channel for a while. So I would be like, oh, I'm writing an adventure and I'm stuck. Let's see what's on the Dream Channel. And then I would take a nap and see if I had any ideas after. I feel like ideas are kind of like rolling snowballs where they just like pick up things on their way. So I'll have like a very small idea that's like a phrase or a single image, and I'll just pop it in like a note on my phone. And then I'll be like out at the grocery store or something, and I'll see something that might relate in a way, and I'll kind of write that down as well. And then it kind of builds momentum. An example of that process is I was in CVS a couple days ago and I saw like two signs side by side for like two different products. And I kind of transposed the wording and read it as Wi-Fi enabled baby instead of like something that it was what it was supposed to be, which is something totally different. And I wrote that phrase down, and I'm looking for, what is that about? What are like ways into that narrative? What is a world in which that phrase would be normal? And then I'll find the next thing and write that down. And then it'll kind of spin out of control, and I'll end up with a whole document that might be like thousands of words of just totally random thoughts that kind of gel together around the phrase Wi-Fi enabled baby. A lot of it feels kind of like being a magpie and just looking for things where you can find them and hoarding shiny things. I think I'm just always on the lookout for where I can make observations and take two things that seem kind of disparate and smash them together and see what comes out of the middle space.
How do you think RPGs and storytelling through RPGs are going to change and grow in the coming years?
Ooh, so we've definitely seen more diversity in the space for about as long as I've been working in RPGs professionally. There's been a lot of push towards working more with consultants and being careful about representing other cultures at your table, as well as pushing more towards consent and safety mechanics. I see all of those things continuing. I'm wondering what do I think that's going to be new? I definitely think that people are going to continue pushing towards ensuring safety and ensuring consent and ensuring that people's boundaries are respected at RPG tables. I think especially at cons or in more pickup settings where you're playing with strangers, that can be dicier than playing with your friends, where it's easier to just say, let's pause for a second here. Situations where you might need something more rigid, like an X card. What I think is going to be new, I think we're going to see a lot of people being more willing to take a chance on smaller systems that maybe aren't D20 focused. I see a lot of people who come into the hobby through like very crunchy D20 based systems that might, see what's new on itch or what's coming out of some jams or what's coming out of like zine month or what's like crowdfunding, and kind of jump off into something else. And I want to see people get really passionate about those niche RPGs that tell very specific stories. Like when I was first getting into the hobby as a hobbyist and was kind of overwhelmed by there's a game that can do pretty much whatever you want to do. And I was overwhelmed by that fact and didn't know how to really find what I was looking for in all of that abundance. I want people to develop more literacy in that space and to get better at finding the game that may not be popular, but that really does what they are looking for specifically. Because I'm pretty confident that, let's say you want to tell a story about like elves on a zeppelin in 1920s France. Someone has probably done that on itch. You just have to know how to find it. And I anticipate there being like more search tools and indexing and cataloging to help match people to those smaller games and those more independent creators.
What is your favorite thing about playing RPG games?
The connection, definitely the feeling of connection. I think that there's something really powerful about sitting around with people to tell a story. I think that's very almost primal and goes back to like sitting around fires in like way back, just telling stories because that's how you understand the world around you. And it feels really good to get in touch with that and to really be deliberate about things like that in a world that's as fast paced as ours. I think just getting to take the time to connect with the people around you.
When you're sitting down to write a campaign to play with your friends, are you writing an overarching long story all before you really start playing, or are you writing more on a session by session basis?
I try to have something that I'm aiming for in the future, but I go session by session because I never want to end up in a place where I kind of have done a bunch of prep and the players do something that kind of negates that prep. I'm a pretty low prep GM because I tend to assume that my prep work won't survive because no matter what I assume the players are going to do, they'll find a way to do something else. So I try to gently steer towards some kind of end goal, whether it's like a final boss battle or something of that nature. But how the players get there is very up to them, which means that I'm only really able to see 10 feet ahead. So I might go into a session with like a page of notes and then get 20 minutes in and scrap it and start improvising. So I tend to try to stay pretty focused on what's immediate, but I have some kind of finale that I'm nebulously aiming towards.
When the players inevitably go against what you've planned out and you have to start improvising, what is your strategy and sort of game plan for when you have to improvise?
So I've been told that my biggest tell is saying like, let me think about that because I do try to be very careful and very deliberate, but I'm aware that I'm under time pressure. And I tend to not GM with like a screen, but I'll like GM from my laptop and have PDFs open so that they're searchable. And if I kind of like retreat behind the computer, that feels like going behind the GM screen where all the secrets are for me. And I'll be like clicking through different documents. But if a player like tries to do something that's totally off the wall, I have not accounted for it at all. I have no idea what's going to happen next. I will say, let me think about that for a second. And like, I'm never going to tell someone not to do something, but I see a lot of value in just taking like 90 seconds to pause. I think that's like the upper limit of how long your players will stay engaged, just sitting in silence. Longer if you've got like music and snacks and stuff. But I will just give myself 90 seconds to like breathe, recalibrate, and figure out like, oof, what am I going to do next? And I think where people get into trouble is trying to adapt too quickly because sometimes your first thought is not your best thought. Sometimes it is, but don't assume that it will be. Like, I think that maybe a player says they're going to do something that seems totally unhinged to you, and your immediate reaction doesn't really serve what you want out of the story or what your players want out of the story. Something else that I do is I'll turn things back around to my players a lot. So if they say they're doing something or they're going to attempt something that sounds like totally bonkers to me, I'll be like, okay, what does that look like? Or like, can you tell me more about that? And try to really open up the collaboration and bring them into the process. I think that also enables me to be lower prep because I can kind of outsource the more tricksy little things, especially when it comes to like description that I feel unprepared for. Like, oh, we've entered a new room. What does it look like? What's in the room? And then try to pay attention to what they say and find ways to have callbacks to that to make it feel more deliberate. But I do recommend just taking a second to pause. And if you really have nothing, leave it very open to your players.
So what does lower prep look like for you? Because for you, as someone who professionally writes RPGs, probably looks something very different than what I do, because on occasion I have had just one note and that is what I've tried to go off for a session. So what does that sort of stuff look like for you?
Yeah, so when I say low prep for my personal like home table, I mean extremely low prep. Like I will have like a couple bullet points maybe. The problem with that and the biggest hurdle that I've had to jump to writing professionally is the fact that when I write an adventure for an audience, I am not just translating my notes and making them legible to someone other than me. I have to give them more than that. Like people are paying for this. They want like the whole thing. That you can't just give someone three bullet points. Like you need details and description and all that stuff. And something that's come up recently in my day job is that I don't think very visually. Like I don't think in terms of images. And I'm very fond of asking players to describe what NPCs or new settings look like because that doesn't really come to me easily. But when you're writing, world building or lore for a wider audience, the GM picks up the book that they paid for, assuming that they will not have to do that work. So I have to give it to them. And I had to have it spelled out to me very clearly that not all GMs want to GM the way that I GM, and not all GMs are made of pure chaos the way I am. And when I'm, actually doing work that will be published and is not just for me, I have to like really dig in. But when I say low prep for my home table, I do mean very low prep, unfortunately. And that does get in my way when I'm writing professionally.
What are your thoughts on the uses of VR and AR and other newer technologies for RPGs and storytelling with them?
Ooh, I haven't gotten very into VR myself. I do see a lot of potential in app integration and AR as a way to show players things at the table or to be able to visualize things in real space. I think it could not replace but supplement the way people use like battle maps and minis to be able to see pieces moving digitally and map that onto your physical space. I'm really curious to see what would come out of that. I myself haven't gotten very much into VR. I'm very curious about it, but I have never like gotten the chance to play with it. But that's probably something similar in that space too, of just being able to have a very like limber and agile visualization of kind of complex terrain or like a really engaged battle map and to be able to move things around digitally in 3 dimensions. I think that would be really powerful.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been great interviewing you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, make sure to follow and leave a like. And if you think a friend might enjoy it, make sure to share it with them. This show is sponsored by Foundry 6. Foundry 6 is working on a really cool new AR video game that combines RPGs and real world. The game they're working on is called A Realm. This game will be blurring the lines between fantasy and reality, meaning you can battle a goblin in your kitchen or fight a dragon on the beach. If you want to learn more, make sure to head on over to arealmrpg.com. That is AREALMRPG.com. The game is currently in early access, so you can go and check it out there. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope I can see you next time.